You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. This week, truly international, because our lovely Annie is back.
I'm so glad to be back.
I'm so glad you're back. I was so confused without you. I need you to keep me on track.
No, you did a great job. I can't wait for part 3.
Yes, because today we will be talking about the investigation and the trials in the Elfriede Blauensteiner case. The third and final part, I promise. But before we start, just a quick reminder, please send us your email for the Halloween special until the 20th of October. You will automatically have a chance for the giveaway. Thank you to everyone who already took the time to write to us. We already received some amazing stories.
Yes, so please get it in before October 20, okay? And even if we can't read your story in the episode because of time restraints, you'll still be in the pool and have the chance to be picked as a winner, which is pretty exciting. Sometimes she sends me chocolates, y'all. You will not be disappointed. So now it's time for Johanna to tell us all about Elfriede Blauensteiner. And like I said, even though I was not physically present and here the last 2 weeks, I was like all of you, listening every Friday and catching up on this case. So I have listened to part 1 and 2. I can't wait to hear how this all comes to an end, and I'm hoping it's satisfying.
Awesome. I'm glad you listened to it.
Yeah, so good.
For everyone who didn't listen yet, please make sure to listen to part 1 and 2 before, because otherwise you will have no idea who I'm even talking about. Let's be real.
Facts.
Quick recap. Elfriede Blauensteiner, born in 1931 in Vienna, endured a tough upbringing during the Great Depression and World War II. Her father died when she was young, her mother was cold and distant, the stepfather abusive. She also claimed to be a victim of domestic abuse during her marriages, though it's unclear if those claims were true. After multiple failed jobs and relationships, she turned into one of Austria's most infamous serial killers, earning her the nickname the Black Widow. Blauensteiner targeted elderly, wealthy individuals, manipulating them into altering their wills in her favor. She would then poison her victims using a combination of glucagon, which is a diabetes medication, and antidepressants. Always meticulous, she ensured her victims appeared to die naturally from what appeared to be either heart failure or seizures or lung infections at first glance. She preferred that her victims died in the hospital to reduce suspicion even further, though her final victim broke this pattern by dying at home. Her murders were greed-driven, fueled by a severe gambling addiction. Her last victim died in 1995, a man named Alois, who lived in his home in the beautiful Wachau, and I told you all about that last week.
Yeah, that area sounds beautiful, and Elfriede is a really nasty piece of work, isn't she?
For sure she is, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what Elfriede hadn't anticipated this time was that Alois did have a distant relative who did care about what had happened to Alois. Was it out of fear of losing his inheritance or because he really cared? Who can say? But that distant relative, it was some nephew-in-law or something like that, did care, and he was suspicious of Elfriede, and he did in fact contact the police. And they did actually start to look into the whole thing. And Elfriede had absolutely no idea what was going on behind the scenes, because she was busy trying to cash in on the inheritance and trying to set up new personal ads to find her next victim.
She's a busy lady. She's
so busy. She's so busy. You're gonna hear about it in a second. The funeral was set for 25th of November 1995, so 5 days after Alois' death, but it had to be delayed due to the police investigations. The body was sent to Vienna for an examination. And wouldn't you know it, they found a nephronil. If you remember, there were these 2 drugs Elfriede used to murder her victims.
Yes, I do remember. So, glucagon is a brand name for glibenclamide, also known as glyburide in some countries, which is a medication used to treat type 2 diabetes. It helps to lower blood sugar levels by stimulating the pancreas to release more insulin. And anafranil is a brand name for clomipramine, an antidepressant from the tricyclic family. It's primarily used to treat obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, and sometimes panic disorders, and it affects brain chemicals to help regulate mood and anxiety levels, but also has quite a sedative effect.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. She used Euglocon or Euglocon, how it's called in German, to poison her victims, even though they weren't diabetic. And that caused fatal drops in their blood sugar. And the anafranil, it has, as you said, the sedative effect. And that was also used in combination to further incapacitate them. By the way, and now it gets really interesting, the coroner who examined the body was Dr. Christian Reiter, who is a well-known Austrian forensic pathologist. I'd say he's the best-known Austrian forensic pathologist. We don't have a lot of them, to be fair.
Yeah.
He worked on several high-profile cases. The Angels of Death from the Linz Hospital, for example, was one, the nurses who killed the patients.
Mm-hmm.
And he has, of course, like everybody else, his own podcast now called Klenk und Reiter. It's in German, unfortunately. But it's really interesting there. He discusses not only the cases he worked on, but many other true crime cases and also other interesting historical events from the point of view of a forensic pathologist. And he, of course, also talks about the Blauensteiner case.
Oh, interesting. I wish I could listen to his podcast. So, did they also find the Euglocon?
Well, no, apparently not. And I only realized that after listening to Dr. Reiter. He explained that she apparently had run out of Euglocon. And that's what was ultimately one of the things that caused a lot of troubles for her, because she couldn't fall back on her usual MO that was tried and tested for her. So Dr. Reiter, he found the anafranil, but after the examination, he still had no idea of what was ultimately the cause of death. Uncertain if a murder could even be proven. But it was for sure suspicious. So the police had to find a way to prove that Elfriede Blauensteiner had something to do with the death of this man named Alois. So they started to interview neighbors, friends, acquaintances, and a picture of Elfriede Blauensteiner started to form. And most accounts kind of sounded similar. So Alois had been a widow for a little bit over 2 years, and he was always very spry and active, even though he was an older man. He still worked in his garden, but he also had been a bit too depending on his wife. And I think this is something we are starting to see less and less nowadays with the younger generations. But back in the day, it was very commonly accepted that men had no idea how to cook and clean and organize the house, right?
Completely incapable.
Exactly. The elderly widower, a man left alone after his wife passed, suddenly lost in a world he never really understood. And I'm not even joking. Now, we're not talking about men lost in deep philosophical contemplation or a midlife crisis. No, these guys were actually baffled by the most basic of tasks, like how to boil water without burning it, or, heaven forbid, iron a shirt, things like this. And it's a story as old as time, or at least as old as traditional gender roles, which also means as old as time, probably.
Yeah.
Women take care of the home, cleaning, cooking, managing the family finances, and men busy being the breadwinners. And I think you can see where this is going for these men. Life was pretty straightforward until it wasn't. When their wives passed away suddenly, they were in a position where they had to take care of the household, and that was something they never learned to do. A lifetime of never stepping into the kitchen or figuring out how to work the washing machine now basically caught up with them. And it wasn't just about being emotionally lost without a partner. They were practically helpless. And of course, it didn't help that society at the time didn't exactly encourage men to learn all these basic domestic skills. After all, why would they need to? They had the wives to do all of that until they didn't.
That's right. Also, this was a generation where if you weren't marrying, you maybe didn't leave the home, ever. It was just such a problem. It's still a problem. Elderly, isolated, grieving, and trying to figure out what detergent to use while still coping with the person that always took care of everything is awful. And it's awful on both sides, right? Like, even if you're not traditional in that way, I always said after I was widowed at 28 that if I ever married again, I was going to create a binder for each of us, for each spouse, just to put in like passwords, recipes, like what websites I use to order certain household stuff, like all the stuff that I do, put in one binder, and then put all of the stuff Paul knows in that binder. And so if anything ever happened, I wouldn't be stuck like that again. You know, just we'd each create like a how to navigate the house.
Yeah, that's the thing. The fact that I'm home alone most of the time because Philip is in another country.
Yeah.
That helped me a lot with these things. Even though we're not that generation, there are still things that basically mostly the men take care of and the women take care of. And I had to step up a lot of things and learn a lot of things. And he taught me a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you create the binders?
No, I did not. I learned nothing. I never do. Never. But I'm telling you, it's not a bad idea. As someone who has been, you know, crying over yard equipment, like, could you come back and haunt this? Because I'm going to now have to hire someone. Like, I can't.
And that's it. I'm not even judging. I'm not judging.
No,
I'm not
no
making
judgment.
fun of these people. Yeah.
Yeah, even if you think you're like equal 50-50, I guarantee you there is something your partner does that you do not know how to do.
Definitely.
Probably.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's also a problem because whenever you're in need of assistance, you also become very vulnerable. And chances are that you might be exploited in one way or another. And this goes for men and women. I think in a sense, the inability to manage a household became more than just a minor inconvenience because it kind of left you open for a certain kind of exploitation. So yeah, because a widower would try to find a woman to replace his wife, not in an emotional way, probably, but, you know, just like there used to be this thing where women used to be depending on men in a financial way.
Yes.
And if you were a widow, you would try to find another man to support you and your children. And we talked about this so many times before.
Yeah.
And I'm really not judging. It's how it used to be. And now things are often different and it's getting less and less. And it's important and good to be able to live an independent life if you need to.
Agreed. Yeah, that's a real gift if you're able to survive very independently.
Anyway, back to Alois, because in the podcast, Dr. Reiter mentions that this man was so depending on his wife that shortly before her death, I think she died of cancer, I'm not really sure, she packed a suitcase for him and stored it in the attic just in case he ever needed to go somewhere after she had passed away.
Wow. That really is so dependent and so sweet.
But also kind of stressful if you're already dying of cancer and you have to think of all these things you could prepare for your husband. I mean, I'm sure he didn't ask her to do that, but still, it's like you see where her worries were, where her head was.
Well, if she loved him, she might have just been really concerned about still trying to take care of him as best she could, you know? I think I'd feel that way. I mean, not packing a suitcase, you know what I mean?
That's like my husband who, when he's home, the thing he always does is he always looks at my phone, sees that the battery is almost empty, and he always connects it. And I'm sure he would do these kind of things, like write me little notes. Don't forget to charge your phone, please. Things like that. Yeah.
Oh, Paul's always plugging things in for me. He just follows me around plugging things in. I love him so much.
Anyway, yeah, Alois, he tried to find a new wife, and he too did place a personal ad. And I'm not sure if he replied to her ad or if she replied to his ad. I know last week I said he wrote a letter to her. It could have been the other way around and she replied to his ad. I don't know. But anyway, his ad apparently read something like, quote, widower, retired civil servant, single, lonely, Roman Catholic, 75 years old, 165 tall, lives in new house in beautiful area in Wachau, driver's license preferred, end quote.
Wow. Well, if Elfriede Blauensteiner was the one who saw the ad and wrote the letter, I could see why that might pique her interest. It sounds like it has all the elements of her favorite kind of victim.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lonely.
Absolutely. The retired civil servant, house, widower, lonely.
Lonely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I hate her so much.
I can't wait because I have to ask you a couple of things in the end about your opinion. So the police is hearing all these stories that he was this healthy but lonely widower, that one day this woman from Vienna showed up and how she was very fancy, dressed to the T. And let me tell you something. You'll be the talk of every tiny Austrian village if you show up in a fur coat and you come from Vienna. Trust me on that. And everybody's gonna know. And the police hears how she moved in and how all of a sudden Alois started to be sick. And shortly after, he was dead. And of course, Elfriede Blauensteiner was now a suspect. And they started to wiretap her, so they were listening in on her phone calls, hoping they would catch something that would incriminate her. And even though she appeared to have been very smart and creative when it came to murder, she was not very smart when it came to foreseeing what the police could actually do. She definitely didn't expect that they were listening, because she talked freely to her lawyer. Remember the Lionel Hutz, Saul Goodman type of lawyer? And to other friends. And what was she saying? Well, she talked about the fake will, and the lawyer reassured her that everything was going according to plan and that nobody was suspecting anything. She wondered where the rest of the saving books could be hidden and asked for advice on where to look. She asked for advice on how to word her next personal ad. By the way, she took notes for her next personal ads on the back of the obituary she wrote for Alois, but I'll get to that in a second. And then the most incriminating thing, she talked about how she had murdered Alois, how she had placed him in the tub with a few inches of ice-cold water because she had to be careful that he wouldn't inhale or swallow any water. She knew they would have been able to find the water in the lungs if she would have simply drowned him. And how he had passed away in the bathtub and how that was very inconvenient for her.
I mean, that really should do it, right?
Yes. But before she could be arrested, there was the funeral. It took place on 1st of December 1995. And you want to hear what Elfriede Blauensteiner had written in the obituary, the one I just mentioned? Quote, and it's translated from German obviously, "When strength comes to an end, deliverance is a mercy. Alois has been called by God the Lord after a short but severe illness." End quote.
Ugh.
The audacity.
Yeah, that's gross. I mean, it's not untrue, but she murdered him.
But she was the reason for the short and severe illness.
She was the reason for the strength coming to an end there.
People in the little village started to speculate if Elfriede Blauensteiner would even dare to show up to attend the funeral.
So everyone thinks she did it. Everyone is like, do they hate her or do they think she's responsible? Or both?
They think she's what we call in German a Erbschleicher, somebody who's trying to get the inheritance.
Yeah.
They found her very suspicious. So what do you think? Did she show up to the funeral?
I bet she did.
Yeah.
Saucy bitch.
She came fashionably late, making it all about her and her entrance in her fancy clothes. I assume her fur coat. And that's the best part, she had a bodyguard with her because she must have feared that the nephew or the enraged villagers would start attacking her with pitchforks and
torches.
Torches, right? She really did have a bodyguard. And that bodyguard later came forward and said she had offered him 300,000 shilling back then if he would testify that if he was like the witness for signing the will. Something like that. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's true or if he just wanted to insert himself in the story, but yeah, he came later and said...
It's believable.
The funeral, yeah, she threw a couple of long-stemmed red roses on top of the coffin as it was lowered into the ground, and then she whispered a very gaspy adieu before she got in the backseat of the car and had herself driven back to Vienna.
No. This is so dramatic. This is soap opera dramatic. Like, if you weren't telling me this right now, I'd be like, this did not happen. This is a scene from The Godfather.
This is not even only soap opera. This is really like...
Yeah.
Latin telenovela gasps in Spanish.
Yes, it is. It is. Very telenovela. Yeah. Wow. The audacity.
But there was no evil twin or something like that.
No, it was just Elfriede.
Elfriede Blauensteiner was arrested in the early morning of 11th of January 1996, and she was held for 11 days, and every day she was taken from her cell to be interrogated.
So she just didn't confess willingly, quickly?
No, of course not. At first she denied having anything to do with anything. She tried to manipulate her way out of the situation by confusing the officers, but little by little they told her what they knew as a fact, and whenever they could convince her of what they knew, she admitted a little bit more. And so, little by little and step by step, she told them about murdering Alois and the others that they didn't even know about yet. Don't worry, she would pretty quickly withdraw her confessions. She said that her confessions had been coerced by threatening violence. She said the officers had threatened to punch her in the vagina.
Oh, wow.
But she did say that they all had deserved to die and that she hated them and hated most men in general.
Did they figure out how she had murdered her last victim? Because you said she hadn't used the Euglycon in that case.
Right, so as I said, that's what Dr. Reiter said in his podcast, so that she had run out of the Euglycon, and so she only sedated him with the Nefronil and had placed him in the ice-cold water, and then she had also put water-drenched towels in the freezer and then put the frozen towels on her victim. So basically he had died from hypothermia, and that's why the victim had passed away sooner than she had anticipated, because she had not experienced that kind of thing. That's not what she used to do, right? And that's also the reason why it was so hard to pinpoint a cause of death.
Wow. I don't want to say ice cold killer because of the obvious, pun, but...
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about people just being cold and unfeeling, and it's harder to imagine sedating someone and then watching them freeze to death. That's
such a drawn out death. I mean, and the thing is, the poisoning she did with the Euglycon and the Nefronil, she didn't do it like once. It was such a drawn out process that took month and month and month. That weakened the body of the victim and made them more vulnerable to infections and the like.
Yeah.
And that's also what Dr. Reiter said. He was so fascinated by the fact how she had combined these two drugs and made the death look like a natural death.
Yeah.
He found that genius, but in an evil genius kind of way.
I get that. I understand that feeling very much so.
So Elfriede Blauensteiner was held for 14 months in pre-trial custody. That's how long it took the prosecutors to build the case, and the trial started in February of 1997. And it would take 3 weeks, or almost 4. The media interest was huge. The courtroom was packed every day, and Elfriede Blauensteiner would put on a show every day, always dressed nicely, with a nice manicure, dressed in skirt suits. She would be all diva. Often she would hold a little golden cross, and I think the photo of her showing the cross to the photographers is one of her most infamous and iconic ones. I think at one point she showed the cross and said something like, quote, "The wickedness is not within me but all around me. If there is a vampire among you, he will now crumble into a pile of ashes," end quote, holding the cross up. Another infamous quote of hers is, quote, "Es ist keinen Mann schade, wenn stirbt," which translates to, "It's never a loss when a man dies." And of course, she was also quoting Pontius Pilatus, "I wash my hands of this."
Wow.
Of course, completely innocent woman.
Yeah.
Of course, she was also examined by psychiatrists, and they described Blauensteiner as having a massive need for attention and an overwhelming desire to control. They said that Elfriede Blauensteiner was a master of manipulation. She had an incredible ability to read people, sizing them up in an instant. As I said, she craved attention and power, making everyone around her focus on her. The psychiatrists even compared her to the classic poisoner stereotype, sweet and innocent on the outside, but driven by greed underneath. These kind of killers get a twisted pleasure from watching their victims slowly deteriorate. That's what I meant. It's such a drawn-out process.
Yeah.
It's not direct violence. It's sneaky and very sadistic. And it reflects the darker side of these kind of killers, which are often females.
It's very much, that saying that people say all the time now, I joke with Beanie, waking up and choosing violence. But really, that's what it is. Every single day, you're waking up and making a conscious decision to murder someone who loves you.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Blauensteiner knew how to trap her victims, how to make them depending on her, draining them of everything, isolating them, draining them emotionally and financially. And once one victim was out of the picture, she was so quick to move on to the next.
Yeah, so you've sent me this picture of her with the cross. I think, did you post this one in the Facebook group too?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Her nails really do look good. You are not wrong. But
really,
that
I mean, she's been in prison for 14 months already, and her nails are, the manicure is on point.
They must have let her have a file, but like an emery board, probably not a metal one for obvious reasons.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. But her hair is almost as terrible as that smirk on her ugly face. And I mean like ugly from the inside. She's got, maybe it's because I know she's a sadistic serial killer, but she just looks bad.
The interesting thing, and as also Dr. Reiter talked about this, I read everywhere that she was considered a very beautiful young woman. I would love to see photos of her when she was young. I couldn't find any. I know there are photos of her in her memoirs that is out of print. I never saw that book. And Dr. Reiter talked about how her third husband, well, they were not legally married, but the old Catholic Church traditional husband, the Fritzl, that all his neighbors were so jealous because he was like, he was not really a good looking man who kind of, he was very homely, I'd say. And they were all jealous because they couldn't understand how he could score such a beautiful wife.
Maybe she used to be beautiful and she just rotted from the inside.
I guess so.
I could see her having quite a good body. She might have been like really good figure. I don't know. She just looks ugly because I know she's a murderer.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not a good color on her. She looks like Robin Williams as Mrs. Doubtfire. A little bit, right? It's like fine. It's just, I think not the look she was going for.
Maybe also she made herself appear more like toned down in a way.
Matronly. Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, this is a murder case and we're not here to judge the fashion of the murderer.
Can we not? Can we not judge this one specific person?
The verdict for the murder of Alois came on 7th of March 1997 and Elfriede Blauensteiner was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Her lawyer friend, Harald A. Schmidt, was sentenced to 7 years behind bars for fraud and causing Alois bodily harm that resulted in his death. Because what had come to light is that he had actively helped Elfriede Blauensteiner to lift Alois into the bathtub.
Who are these people, honestly? Your lawyer's helping you get the body into the tub? What?
Yeah, not only is he forging signatures and testaments and wills, no, he's actively helping you murder a person.
Awful.
That's where we're at, yeah. I found an article that talks about what happened to the lawyer later on. And again, I had to translate it from English. It's from the Nönde Niederösterreichische Nachrichten from 11th of October 2011. It's an excerpt and it was written by Jutta Haslinger. Quote, on April 14th, 2000, Schmidt walked out of prison on parole and got by with odd jobs. His law license had been revoked. Thanks God for that. The 54-year-old has not held any regular employment since, living on unemployment assistance of around 900 euros per month. He became increasingly isolated and claimed to have fallen into depression, as he stated in court. In a state of emotional distress, he allegedly used his ex-wife's computer in Langenzersdorf to vent his frustrations about being unemployed. Schmidt shared his view on the online platform Alpen-Donau Forum, posting writings that included typical Nazi ideologies, such as Holocaust denial and the lie of war guilt. These posts led to a trial for crimes under the Prohibition Act and the offense of incitement. Quote, I didn't intend to break any laws. I'm not a political person, Schmidt protested in court, claiming he had no connection to right-wing ideologies. Quote, didn't you run for office in the 1980s with the ENR, the now banned party Aktion Neue Rechte, which is a far right-wing party that doesn't exist anymore? And why did you choose a quote from Adolf Hitler as your signature in one of your posts? Judge Manfred Hohenecker asked. The post filled with far-right extremist content made Schmidt's claim of a changed mindset seem implausible. Prosecutor Karl Schober also didn't see Schmidt as a harmless fool, instead categorizing him as one of the intellectual right-wing extremists. The jury agreed and unanimously found Schmidt guilty. The sentence, 18 months in prison. Schmidt immediately announced his intention to appeal, end quote. That just shows what kind of person
just a terrible,
all over.
Just an all over terrible, they're made for each other, really, him and Elfriede. Now, was Elfriede's trial about the murder of Alois, which was her last victim, but there had been others, and do we know how many?
Yes, so there were probably 5 or 6 minimum, with her second husband, Rudolf, probably being her first victim. Then there was this old man, Otto, from the couple that she took care of, where the wife, I think Victoria was her name, she died first from the complications of the sugar food thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this other elderly lady she took care of, Franziska, and then Fritzl, her old Catholic church husband. And then she also took the man she assisted with his suicide, but I'm not really firm on what was going on there. I think we don't have a lot of information about that. But let's focus on the ones we know. So Otto and Rudolf couldn't be proven. In Rudolf's case, he had been cremated. What was the problem with Otto? I honestly don't remember. I think they exhumed him, but they couldn't prove anything in his remains or something like that. Now, anyway, in Franziska's case, remember, she had been buried in a crypt and her remains were still in pretty good condition, like perfect condition for a coroner or a pathologist. And Fritzl, Elfriede Blauensteiner had claimed that he had wished for his body to be donated to the Anatomic Institute.
Ah, so his body was gone?
No, because Dr. Reiter, in some Hail Mary move, called the Anatomic Institute and asked if they still had remains of the body of this man called Fritz left. And it had been, I think, 2 years, but he was very lucky.
Wow.
He had been lying in formaldehyde for all these years untouched, because at that time, apparently, they were not in need of more bodies. So he was preserved in perfect condition. So in both cases, Dr. Reiter could examine the remains of the alleged victims, Franziska and Fritz. In Fritz's body, he could see that he had died of complications from a lung infection, but he couldn't find traces of the euglocon because the body had already broken down the drug before he even passed away. And that is, as I said before, the genius thing about her way of murdering people. And please always know that when I say genius, I don't mean that in an admiring way at all. Just want to be very clear about that.
No.
So she used the drugs not to kill them per se, but to weaken her victims, incapacitate them, and then make sure to have them die of natural causes, like lung infection. And that's so hard to prove, any foul play going on, and that's the reason why this could go on for years. And in Franziska's case, they actually found traces of the euglocon in her sarcophagus, because she was entombed in this kind of sarcophagus inside the casket and no contact to soil. You know how it is in a crypt.
Yeah.
I was very lucky, right?
So lucky.
And so there was a second trial. The second trial was for the murders of Franziska and Fritzl, and it started in April of 2001. For a while, nobody knew if there would even be a second trial, because Austrian law only allows for 1 life sentence per individual. So there was some debate about whether it was worth pursuing the new charges, and in the end, the prosecution decided to proceed because they stated, quote, "A murder should never go unpunished," end quote. The fact that the media attention was almost non-existent for this second trial must have hurt Elfriede a lot. During the first trial, the courtroom had been packed, and now it was pretty much just crickets.
Oh man, nobody for her to swan in and flaunt her outfits and flash her jewelry at. Must have really bothered her at least a little bit, right?
Definitely, yeah. So for the murders of Franziska and Fritzl, she was found guilty as well, but as I said before, it didn't have any consequences. There was no additional sentencing because our laws don't add up sentencing like you do in the States. One could obviously argue that this was all just a waste of taxpayer money, but I think it's also important to not only think about how much these trials cost, but also about the fact that it can give some, at least small sense of closure to the families of the victims.
Definitely. I just hope life means life.
Well, I mean, that's not the case here, but in Elfriede Blauensteiner's case, you don't have to worry. Elfriede Blauensteiner would never experience freedom again. She was incarcerated in the JA Schwarzau, Justizanstalt Schwarzau. It's a prison in Lower Austria, very close to where I grew up. It's Austria's only prison dedicated primarily to female inmates. The prison operates out of what used to be Schloss Schwarzau, grand old castle. You remember the difference between a Burg and a Schloss?
Yes. Schloss is nice. Schloss is more like a palace, and
exactly.
Burg is more like a defensive castle.
The Austrian government acquired the property from Elias von Bourbon-Parma in 1951, and they did some major renovations, and it was transformed into a correctional facility in December of 1957, and it's designed for women serving sentences longer than 18 months, including life sentences. They also house female juvenile offenders and women undergoing compulsory measures for mental disorders or substance abuse. Schwarzau can also accommodate 22 men. The facility has room for 193 people in total, 171 women, 22 for men, and the numbers I saw are from August 2007. It was operating at just 80.83% capacity, making it one of the least crowded prisons in Austria. We know that prisons all over the world struggle with overcrowding. The prison site was once a sprawling estate with around 70 hectares of farmland where inmates worked the land. However, this agricultural area was sold off in recent years, and today Schwarzau has a very modern touch. We're all about rehabilitating offenders. They have a dedicated kindergarten and special mother-child department where inmates with young children can stay.
Wow.
There's even a separate building for inmates who work outside the prison during the day. And in 2008, they got another addition, a long-term visitor room, making it easier for families to stay connected with their incarcerated loved ones. So very modern approach.
It's just so different from our prisons. It's just
I mean, it's easy if you have 170 offenders maximum there.
Yeah.
And it's a former castle.
I mean...
Anyway, back to Elfriede Blauensteiner. So while she was in prison, she wrote her memoirs. I mentioned them before. The book is simply titled My Memoirs, which is not very creative, but okay. It's out of print. I don't understand how it was even allowed. But then we're also the country that had convicted murderer and rapist Jack Unterweger write for a kids' show on the radio before he was released. So...
I mean...
Anyway, the memoirs is out of print. And
just as well, probably.
Yeah. As I said, I just would have loved to see the photos. That's all. I would have been really interested. And I couldn't find anything on the internet, not one photo of her youth.
Sometimes Hellions come up with the most surprising information.
True. Elfriede Blauensteiner died on 16th of November 2003 of complications from a brain tumor. She was cremated and her remains were buried in an unmarked grave. And in one of her last interviews, she said, quote, "Ich weiß bestimmt, wenn ich abtrete, dann werde ich ein Engel." End quote, which translates to, I'm certain that when I pass away, I will become an angel. End quote.
That's interesting. It also makes me wonder a little bit, is it possible the brain tumor had been there for a long time, undetected? Could any of this have been... You just wonder, There's no way to know, I don't think. But you mentioned that she also had a daughter. Do we know anything about the daughter? I don't want to pry into her, personal current life or anything, but has she ever spoken about, Elfriede living with her mother, anything like that?
Yes, as far as I can tell, she did give one interview only. That's the only one I found. And in that interview, she opened up about her traumatic childhood with her mother. I know they had an on-off relationship. They were sometimes very close, sometimes very distant, again, with going no contact for prolonged periods of time. The daughter revealed a life dominated by fear and dependence. And according to her, the mother was a figure of intense control and manipulation, leaving her feeling as though she was barely escaping death on a regular basis. Quote, "My mother was incredibly controlling and would sometimes beat me to the point of near death when she was angry," end quote, was one of the things she said in the interview. And when discussing the murders, the daughter noted that Elfriede had a disturbance preference for ensuring her victims were entirely at her mercy. She said, quote, "She seemed to enjoy having someone completely at her mercy. It fit with her character. I don't think she initially planned to kill anyone. It might have just happened with her second husband, and she might have then thought she could do it intentionally to inherit money," end quote. That's also something Dr. Reiter said, that the idea is that the second husband, Rudolf Blauensteiner, he didn't like her going to the casino to gamble away the money. So that she would use the Euglocon to sedate him, so that he would be sleepy and drowsy and she could go off gambling to the casino. And that's how all this started, right? That it was not like a plan of murdering him, but kind of a path that lead into that direction. But it started out differently. What else? The daughter also shared rare moments of remorse from her mother during the time she was under police interrogation. Quote, "Once during my police questioning, my mother apologized for what she did to us. That was the closest I ever felt to her," end quote. However, apparently this sentiment didn't last. By the time she saw her mother again in custody, her apologies had all vanished and were replaced by outright denial. And reflecting on her mother's death, the daughter confessed that despite expecting relief, she also felt a profound sense of loss and finality. Quote, "I thought I would feel relief, but it was really the pain of loss that hit me. There was always this nagging hope that somehow things could have been different," end quote. And I think this is something we hear often from children with this kind of parents or children who have gone no contact. It's the grief, not so much the grief of the parent they knew, but the parent they could have had, right?
Yeah, it's hard. And it's like, you think there's still time to fix things, I think. Even, it's called magical thinking, right? But like in the back of your head, you still believe that this person you love who has hurt you deeply will come to you and say, "I understand. I'm so sorry." You know what I mean? And mean it. And so often it's just that overwhelming sense of loss, of what you should have had, what was taken from you, what was taken from them. It's just hard. It's a hard thing, and we often think we have time to fix things or to rewrite history, and we don't. We never know. I'm glad we talk about it more now, though. I'm glad that people are so much more open about generational trauma and, you know, having survived abuse or really traumatic situations is no longer something that, not all the time, obviously, but more and more, it's people feel welcome and accepted in sharing their experience so that others don't feel so alone in having had it, because these are things that we often hide due to misplaced shame.
Generational trauma is such an interesting thing to me, and it's getting more and more, I'm getting more and more aware of it as I grow older, and especially as someone coming from a country where my grandfather generation was a war generation.
Yep.
The things that get passed on through generations that you don't even know about, why it is there, it's horrifying and fascinating at the same time. It's such an interesting topic, heartbreaking, really.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
I just want to circle back to Elfriede Blauensteiner's claims.
Yeah.
Annie, you listened to the other 2 episodes. What do you think about her claims?
Well, I think first of all, you can't believe anything she says. I think she's lying to make herself seem more of the victim. You know, she's trying to make herself, that's her MO. That's how she rolls. Even if she was being abused at that time, this is the thing that's so frustrating when we always talk about how we like to look for not the thing that excuses it, but the thing that explains the behavior, right? And it's so frustrating because of course we do see, right, people who are hurt other people. But that's the thing that's frustrating, because especially with Elfriede, right? So yes, she grew up in the Depression, and yes, she grew up during a difficult wartime, But so did millions of other people all around the world.
Yeah.
Millions. Like, girl, you are not alone. And you're also not the only person who was maybe abused by someone. I'm not in any way diminishing these things as terrible things to live through, but I think it's kind of a cop-out sometimes to all the people who also survived the war and the Great Depression and spousal abuse and traumatic, terrible things and never slowly poisoned and froze their spouse to death. This is why this stuff is so fascinating.
And it sounds like she really had a hatred for men.
It does sound like she hated men.
Somebody who says that it's never a loss if any man dies. Like, there's some deep hatred for men. But then also she had a female victim, but that was about greed. So.
Yeah, that was more convenient. I think she would have killed anyone that it was convenient for her to kill. I think if she didn't have ready victims, she would have gladly taken out a policy on her own children and killed them.
You think?
Yeah. I think if she was losing control of a situation and didn't have an out, she just always had an out. She always found another victim. So she never had to turn it more inward. But I think she would have. For sure. I think she would have. No, she's just nasty. She's just nasty. And you don't expect somebody who looks like your grandmother to be a murderer, because that's kind of what she looks like.
That's what a couple of people in the Facebook group said. It's shocking because she looks like a grandmother, like their grandmother. Yeah.
Totally looks like a grandmother.
But she's going to be an angel.
Well, I don't know. She's something. I bet she's a problematic ghost somewhere now.
All right, that's the story of Elfriede Blauensteiner.
Wow. Well, I feel awful for the family of her victims who, what a terrible way for your father or grandfather or brother or whomever, to spend the end of their life. That makes me sad. I'm glad she went to prison and died there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have something good?
I do. I missed you a lot. I wasn't here for 2 weeks because my family came over from England for a visit. And so we went down to see my dad for a few days on the Cape. They've never been to a state or county fair in the U.S., and it happened that when they were here, the Big E, the Eastern States Exposition, was going on. So the Big E, you know how there's like the Texas State Fair, the Oklahoma State Fair, the Wisconsin State Fair, like states have fairs, and it's just a huge deal. Ours runs for 2 weeks, and it's massive. And I think it's one of the 3 biggest in the country, actually. But what we have is what's called the Eastern States Exposition. And it is the New England states banding together for their own state fair. And so one of the cool things is they have miniature versions of each of the state houses for each of the states in New England. And in each of those houses, they have specific vendors inside. So, for example, if you go into the main building, you might get a lobster roll or blueberry pie or whoopie pies. And if you go into the New Hampshire or Vermont building, you might get maple syrup, and Massachusetts might have clam chowder or like Wellfleet oysters. So each state has its own thing, and then as a whole, and it's, rides, fried everything. And it was awesome. My brother told me to rent a scooter because I hadn't been in like 30 years. And I'm so glad I rented the scooter because there's no way I could have walked that much that day. But it was great. It was great. Friend of the show, Tammy, she has a booth, I think the Big E has just ended now, but she had a booth in the Connecticut building. She has this company called Stardust Butterfly Creations, and she does these super fun, like, children's books, and then she'll cut blocks out and then paint them so that there's a book with, like, toys for kids to play with. Anyway, the Big E, it's crazy. It was a ton of fun. Couldn't have done it without my scooter. How about you?
I had a horrible week.
I know you did.
And my something good is my brother. I don't even want to get into details. Nobody has to be worried. It was just like one little thing, or not so little thing after the other.
It's just perils of home ownership and demo and repair and
And my something good is my brother, who came immediately and helped me and helped me fix something that needed immediate fixing. And it's not fixed in a forever way, but it's fixed so that it can be like this for the next 2 years until we do the lower floor renovation.
The big thing.
The big thing, yeah. But it was a lot. I'm hanging in there. It's fine. We still have a roof over our heads, and it was not water damage from the heavy rains, so No. It was not that. It was something that we knew was coming.
Yeah, that was terrible. The weather
you missed
that you
a
all
lot
had.
in those 2 weeks. You missed a lot.
I missed so much. I was barely online. I hardly had on a television. I kind of love it when it's like that. I like to really focus on the people I'm with when I'm with them as much as I can. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure I doom scroll like everybody else, but yeah, your brother is awesome. Brothers are awesome. All right.
I think that's it for today.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please do us a huge favor. Go to your podcast app, leave us a rating and or review. Leave us a comment under the Spotify episodes or under our YouTube episodes. We read everything. We enjoy everything. All the criticism, all the compliments, of course. Everything. We love it. Send us emails. Send us your listener story, please, until 20th of October.
Before the 20th of October.
Before the 20th, exactly. And I think that's it. Everything else, go to Patreon, check it out. We just had a lovely get-together where I talked about my grievances with Ryan Murphy and his new show about the Menendez brothers, but that's a whole other thing. And we're gonna have a game night on 28th of September. Check out Patreon if you're interested in supporting our podcast in that way. Join our Facebook group, and that's it. Please tell your pets we said hi. I'm sorry, I'm confused. Please tell your pets we said hi. Hug them, cuddle them, kiss them, give them treats, give them their medicine, their medication if they need it. Take them to the vet. Be kind to them. Be kind to your fellow human being. And most important part of it all, be kind to yourself.
That's right. And if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.